Okay, people, I got another one. They keep coming, apparently. um, this week is a book on Peter the Great. What's this one? It's called Peter the Great. Huh. When you do a biography, the title is always very easy. It's the person, right? Um, Obviously, you know what? I'm even going to do a spoiler for this one. Sorry about that. Because to me, some of these biographies are so good that if you don't know the complete history, it can be like other books where you want a spoiler warning, so you don't want to know how it ends. So, spoiler warning if you don't want to know. I'm going to spoil the book here. Rating. This one was tricky. It was going to be a 5, to be honest with you. But then it like messed up the ending. And I know again, bro, it's a biography. The ending is the ending. And I'm like, not necessarily. Right? Because what I feel now it could be one of two things. Because it was printed up in the 80s, right? It could either be the author, sort of got tired at the end, or they had to limit what they put out. Right? I've seen that happen in another book, another biography back in the day. There was a print length, right? You can only go so far before you'd have to make another book. And that's a monetary decision from the publisher, right? They're like, we can't give you 2 books. We can only give you the one, so squeeze it in or it ain't happening. Right? Which is sort of unfortunate. If the detail from the first half had been kept for the second half, maybe this is 2 books, I don't know. Right now it's not a problem. You make the thing digital or an audible, no one cares. But I feel like something was left on the table. I feel like the end, the back half, is sort of truncated, and so I had to take some points off of it. So what is it? I think it's a solid 3. Right? If you're into this genre, this ain't the best you can get. Now, I haven't read every biography of Peter the Great. Maybe when I'm done, this is the definitive, right? Maybe you can't get better than this. Maybe this is as good as you can write a book about Peter the Great. But I doubt it. I highly doubt it. In any case, I sort of hold it up against other biographies, and other biographies do a better job. Your boy William Manchester, your boy Robert A. Caro, to name a few. So there's better out there. Having said that, if you're sort of new to history, right? If you don't know a lot of the players involved, if you're not well versed in the subject matter, this is a great book. Not like a textbook. Again, it's a biography. What's the difference? The difference is a biographer will give you the story elements, right? A textbook is just the facts over and over, sort of. There's no life in it. And I feel like you need the life to connect to history, right? I need to feel. I need to feel what that is, not just be told things were hard then. It's not the same. But if you don't know a lot, then this to you is like a 4, maybe a 5. Because the way the author does it, he fills in a lot that's around in a really good way. If I need to talk about King George, he can pick up that thread and present it to you fairly quickly, concisely, without leaving too much out, right? And some biographers, if you read Winston Churchill's biography of William Marlborough, he ain't filling you in on a lot of stuff. You got to come prepared for that one, right? You got to know what the crap is going on. And it can get difficult. This one, 17th century, 18th century, that era is very tricky. You grab Europe, right? And then you turn it into like the seven best seasons of the Real Housewives in levels of drama. You got people cross marrying. You got distant cousins at war. You got son fighting father. And there's like 75 people named Henry, 75 people named Alexis, 75 people, you know what I mean? We keep reusing the names. We keep, and you're like, is he German or French? Well, he's technically French now, but his ancestors are German, and they want to put him on the Polish throne. I'm like, what the crap's happening? Right? And I think this is why you get names like Peter the Great, Henry the Lion, um, Prince Eugene of Savoy. Right? You're like, why the extra detail? I'm like, you need the extra detail to keep up with these fools in this era. So if you don't know already coming in, and it's a lot to know, right? That's not a simple thing. But if you don't know, this book catches you up along the way very well. And it could lead to a lot of other interesting subjects, right? If this is a backdrop in your mind, you could read the other books much better. But like I said, it was published in '85, and I got to talk about the actual physical publishing, right? It came with one of these paper skins, but I left it over there, so I can't reach it. I'll put a picture up. It looks fine. The printing itself, I think, looks better. Just this simple black. It has this sort of like Peter the Great eagle situation up here. That looks cool. I think it was an old Russian symbol. The pages again are those uneven situations, which I hate. I absolutely hate. But worse than that, no, I didn't do this, and I got it from an estate sale, I believe. And they didn't look like they did this, meaning they didn't mistreat the book, right? But the bad boy fell apart. Now, if you know anything about books, the pieces aren't supposed to come out, people. Right? That's supposed to be in the book. And I think that's your problem, right? Hold on. I was reading it, and you know, you read a book. These little flicks were coming off on me. I'm like, what the crap? You know, at first I didn't mind until we get to, what is it? I get to this section where I'm sort of holding the book, and it starts to demolish itself, right? The page got ripped. Very unfortunate. See the little rip there. It's got great pictures in it. So you might want to think about that if you're thinking between this and an audiobook. Mind you, it's the internet age. You can find all these pictures online. Probably. I don't know. I think it's the glue, people. Oh man, some of it's coming off on me right now. I think the 80s, or whenever this was made, you know, they're just like, oh, we could just glue it. It's the new stuff from 3M. It said it'll hold for 10,000 years, and then like 30 years later, it's dead. Right? Oh, Lord, what's the order? Oh. Hold on, I gotta find it. I found the order. I found the order. So this thing just, it completely demolished itself. And it was no fault, I don't think, of me or the previous owner. Or maybe it was, but I think if it were like humidity, I would see more, right, damage on the pages. The pages are absolutely fine. Still got a great smell to it, right? This person didn't really go hard on the book. And the outside here is fine. It's just the glue just died, right? What I'm going to do, probably, for fun, is sort of try and rebind it. Get some needle and thread, right? Get some action in there. But It's it is what it is, as they say. All right, I'm back. That's my bad. I had to stop it to sneeze. Got a little sneezy. I think the particulars from this book were getting your boy. Okay, what was on about? Right. About this particular book now. And before I go, I gotta say, I'm trying this no notes this time. Just for just a little change of pace. Let's see how I hold up. Right? Um, this particular book, Peter the Great. Peter the Great reminds me a lot of Napoleon. They're both highly intelligent, highly energized people, right? Very energetic. They of course end up in different situations, have different outcomes, but they both also then had a great effect on the world itself, right? So, Peter the Great. He's born in what? What are we talking? Like 17th century, late 17th century Russia. This is wooden houses. This is serfs. This is kings and queens of England and France and this and that, right? This is carriages. I don't even think they have oil lamps yet, right? So, like, if a fire happens, it's going to be a problem because the town's made of wood. This kind of thing, right? So, he was born, and it just gives you such a great look into that type of Russia. Russia at that time is very Orthodox Christian. In their minds, Rome expands out, right? Until it has this whole, and then it's like cut in half, and here's Constantinople. And so they're like, the heart of Rome is in Constantinople. And then eventually the heart of that comes to us in Russia. So they see themselves as descendants of the great Roman Empire, right? So they're very high-minded. But they're also countrified because they are out in the country by themselves. It's a long way from the rest of Europe. They don't hang out with these people. When they come, they look sort of silly. They don't act the way everyone else does, right? Like back in those days, lords and ladies and hired to do people wouldn't just show up and start selling things, right? I have to have decorum. These fools showed up and started selling furs because they're little money grubbers at that point, right? Like, hey, I can get this scratch. I'm going to get it. And they're like, bro, you're acting like a buffoon. So it's a culture clash, right? Well, he's young. I'm just sort of setting the stage. He's very young. And the way their politics worked, right, is so weird. Back in those days, the women were like not technically second class citizens, but they were treated sideways, right? So if you were rich and a lady, right? Let's say you're the daughter of the Tsar. They're like, you can only marry someone equal in rank to you. But no one's equal in rank to daughter of the Tsar. Ergo, she could never get married. That's actually a fact. They never married him. And all the rich people, they were like, you got to keep all of your women cloistered. So essentially, every house had a second floor, and that's just where the women stayed. Some of them stayed there their whole lives. They maybe had a little peephole where they'd look out at new company coming over, and occasionally they'd come and like give someone a drink, but they wouldn't talk. No one would talk to them, and then they'd go back upstairs, just sitting up there doing, I don't know, reading books. You know, needlework. That's it. Nothing. Now, if you're poor, it was a little different because you'd have to help on the farm and this and that. But in both instances, because they're so strongly orthodox, You could divorce your wife for any sort of reason. But the third wife you had to keep. That's what they said. They're like, look, it's your third wife. We're not letting you divorce again. You're not going to get another one. And so they might mistreat the first one. They might force the second one to go to a nunnery to get out of the marriage. But the third one they have to treat right because you're not going to get another one. Very cloistered. Very odd. Right? And it's so cold, and they're very hard people. So, we get Peter the Great born into this. And if you're the mother of the new Tsar, you have a lot of weight in their politics. Right? We had a collection of boyars. I believe this is sort of like your lords who are going to help the Tsar. The Tsar just needs to be the Tsar. No one does anything to him. But he'll die, the new one comes in, and that family then moves up. Well, when they move up, they like start excommunicadoing the enemies, right? They'll send them always to Siberia. They won't all kill them all, but they'll send them to Siberia. And then if something happens, you could always come back. And if you came back, there'd be retribution, and you'd send the other family to Siberia. So what do I mean, what can happen? Well, this particular Tsar had 2 kids. They had Peter the Great, who even at a young age was robust, healthy, and he had another kid who was kind of crippled, right? He deformed or something, where like you could tell he was very sickly. He was never going to grow right. He had trouble walking. He had trouble doing anything, right? So you had to, between the two, you got to pick one to be Tsar, so we know who's in charge. And so they picked Peter the Great because they're like, look, it's a healthy kid. They're both sons of the Tsar. That'll be fine. Well, the other family didn't like that. The other family wasn't about to go down like that. So they start spreading rumors amongst this group called the Streltsy. What they were is like, imagine a barbarian horde who is completely loyal to the Tsar. I'm like, that's a good thing, right? At any point, the Tsar's like, I'm in danger. And they'll come like, who do I got to cut up? Who do I got to kill? Problem, they're a barbarian horde. So they're sort of silly, and sometimes they don't know who they're defending. Right? And I mean, like, that's not our real Tsar. A witch came and replaced him. Wait, what? Yeah, I remember our Tsar had a mole here, and this one doesn't, so it's not our Tsar. And we're going to kill him. I'm like, bro, you can't just... The dude's the Tsar. You can't just... No, I'm going to kill him. Because he's a witch. Like, bro, you can't just... That's what I'm going to do. And it's essentially what happened here. The enemy faction, let's say enemy, to Peter the Great, and not to him particularly, but to what he represented, their positions of power, sort of whispered amongst these Streltsy that this is going weird. So they're trying to usurp the throne from our righteous Alexis over here, the crippled one. And the Streltsy revolted. And I mean, because you're like, oh, how bad could this be? It was pretty bad. They literally, like, rushed the Kremlin, right? This ancient castle. They just sort of rushed it. And they were looking for a particular family, the Narishkins. I might be saying that wrong. It's sort of Peter's mom's family. Now, Peter, his mom, and his other brother, I believe, were just hiding in the corner. Right? Now, they were obviously seen, but the mob, even them, weren't going to, like, blast the lady. They knew she was the wife of the Tsar. And they weren't going to kill the kids. They know both of them are Tsars. But it just sort of enraged them. And so they were running room after room looking for these Narishkins. And you're like, well, no. Oh, missed an element. I got ahead of myself. They like rush in, all full of blood and vinegar, right? And one of these older gentlemen comes out, an advisor to the lady, very well liked, very well respected. And he comes and he's talking the crowd of guys down, right? And he got them taking a breath, and he's going to get them so that they all leave. But he makes a what is it? He makes a fatal mistake. He thinks we're good, and then he leaves, or he turns to leave. And instead, he should have just sort of stayed till they all left. He leaves. Some other idiot shows up, all high and mighty, and starts telling them what for. Well, if you have a massive crowd, these people hear one thing. These people can't hear so well, and the ones outside don't know what the crap's happening, but it's still, full of blood and vinegar. It reignites them, right? So literally, they then rush up the red stairs. That's what they call them. Because they're like, well, I'm confused. I don't want to be yelled at. I also don't want to get punished if this goes sideways. We'll get to punishments in a minute. So they're like, man, I'm going to go with my original plan. So they bum rush in. They grab this old guy. Not lying. And they yeet him over the staircase. And then he falls like a movie onto the pikes of the other soldiers who were packed in. I'm like, we're early in this book. Peter the Great's like 5. I'm like, what the? And then they just like haul him out, right? Oh, a bloody mess. Literally a bloody mess. Now, the mom and the kids go off to the side. They don't kill them. But they just start hunting everyone else down. Grab this guy. Haul him to the stairs. Throw him over. Grab this other one. Throw him to the stairs. Throw him over. Then hack him up. Then drag him out. I mean, no lying. 20 people they did? Because what they started, once they couldn't find all these family members, because they hid, they ended up hiding in the ladies section. They were going to dress like ladies and, sort of scamper out of there. What they ended up doing, because they would lock up the Kremlin and say, we'll be back tomorrow, we're tired. And they come back tomorrow and keep hunting people. It's kind of jacked. What they ended up doing, because they're like, we got to have some way to end it. They're like, just give me the brother Narishkin. If he gives himself up, we'll leave. But if he doesn't, we'll kill all the boyars, all the sort of people. So all those boyars then go to the lady, the queen, and say, look, you got to give your brother up. We don't all need to die for this. And she ends up doing that. She's going to her brother, talks to him, and he gives himself up with some amount of dignity. Right? He's like, let me go talk to the priest. He does his little priest communion, and he, resolutely goes to face the music. Unjust as it is. Right? They hack him to pieces. No lie. Not going to lie. They hack him to pieces. Which is, I'm like, this is jacked up. I was stunned. But in this sense, I think this happened to... Which one is it? Henry the Fifth? Not the Fifth. Like Henry the Fourth? One of these kings of England, the same thing happened to him. He ended up, him and Peter the Great, end up in like a revolution. And in this revolution, there's a bloody massacre around them. And they both act sort of the same way. It might have happened to one of the French guys too. Maybe happened to Louis the 14th. It's weird. It's this sort of same element happened to 2 or 3 of these guys. And Peter the Great acts like they do. One doesn't like London, one doesn't like Paris, and he doesn't like Moscow. Not at all. I'm not going to hang out there. I don't trust him. And it's a lifelong thing. He ends up at another place, a hunting lodge called Preobrazhenskoy. Very cool sounding name. But yeah, they all live through this sort of horrendous ordeal. And it has an effect on Peter the Great, sort of the rest of his life. You can imagine the distrust he might sort of well up in him from this, right? That literally happens when he's like 5. They end up making peace. And if you're wondering, like, well, what's so bad about, getting in trouble? Why would they, well, part of what they did in Russia is like torture is commonplace. They would break you on the wheel. They would the knot. I think they called it the knot. Knout. I don't know how to say this word. Basically, they'd whip you with some leather that would, obviously take strips of skin off every hit. And he was good with the whip. He would hit the same spot twice, so you're always losing skin. Or they'd hold you over the flames. Or a combination of the three. Right? Just as standard. Like, you're in trouble, you've admitted your guilt, you know you're going to get tortured, and then we'll let you go. So, like, none of these Strutsky were trying to get themselves tortured. Right? Sort of rough. Old school Russia was rough. So, Peter grows up, and that was like stage 1, right? Peter then is a young man, 8, 9, 12, and he grows up in this hunting lodge, essentially. They expand on it because the royal family's there or whatever. Now, early childhood, right? What is his like? He's the Tsar, so no one can tell him anything. And he's headstrong, so he don't want to be told stuff. The teacher comes, he's like, I'm not learning this, I don't want to learn that. Tell me about this, tell me about that. Right? He sort of dictate his own education in some sense. But he's a headstrong young man. What does he want to do? I want to play soldier. So, they would get other young men around him as companions, and others would send some. But he'd like break them up into little regiments. His own little play soldiers. He gave them little wooden guns. But he's also the Tsar. So it didn't take long for him to get bored of wooden guns and ask for real stuff. And they sent it. By like 14 or whatever, my boy's playing with actual cannons, actual muskets, actual gunpowder, right? He likes to blow stuff up. And he has the means and ability to do it. Of course, they send sort of like military people to oversee so he doesn't blow himself up. But that's how he spends a lot of his youth. He spends a lot of his youth playing war. Like full-on mock battles. We'll build an entire fort over the summer just to blow it up in a sort of a siege type of situation. You dig a trench up to it. You break the walls down. They defend it a certain way. Little fake grenades with plaster. The whole thing. The whole 9 yards. Uniforms. Everything. He'd do that and he'd hang out in what they called the German sector. There was a little spot in Russia, in Moscow, because these people were very... Anytime anything goes wrong, it's kind of like the Nazis did with the Jews, right? It's all the Jews' fault. Anytime anything went weird in Russia, they were like, well, the problem is foreign influence. And you sort of ran a risk of this upheaval. So they all sort of like ended up living together on a little island. Well, Peter the Great would go to that little island, talk to Dutch sailors, Dutch, craftsmen, this and that. And he had a general liking for foreigners. He didn't mind them. He was never going to change his religion, but he didn't mind these people. He was very religious and didn't mind them, which was particular in Russia. Also, another major turning point in his life was at... I don't remember the name of the river. See, this is where notes would have helped. He goes to a certain river. We had a little lake, and he meets a Dutch person who can make boats in a little boat. And he's like, tell me everything about boats. I'm the Tsar. And he starts to tell him everything about the boats. And he actually helps this man, along with other serfs, slaves. A lot of slave labor in Russia. The dude helps him make a boat, actually. And he sails it around and he has lots of fun with it. But it also does... It locks in his mind some sort of, or awakens in him, some sort of love for the sea. Now, again, in this time, Russia's completely landlocked. If you go down, I think the Baltic Sea, that's owned by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. They say it's his personal lake, meaning no one else gets in there at all. He just sails around whenever he wants. His army's for real. No one wants to fight him. And up is owned by the Swiss. So he has no outlet really. All of his, and then past the Swiss is the Dutch and the English. All of their ships would do more than his. His merchants don't even sell on their own ships. Like in that day, you'd load a ship up, take it to a port, and sell your stuff. They didn't even do that. The foreign ships will come in to like this icy area, load up the ships in the summer months, and then leave. That's how foreign trade was done. So they're really in a bind. He ends up in love with ships, right? And he doesn't really care about the government. His other brother, because they end up a split system where they both are czar equally, but he just lets the other brother run it. He doesn't care. He really doesn't care, and he might have not ever cared. Except people got squirrely about it. As he gets older and taller and taller and taller, he ended up growing up to about 6'7", right? So he's a big, strapping man. They start to get squirrely about him. And he, because of his youth, thinking there's some bloody rebellion around the corner, is always kind of worried about it. So, that's what happens. His sister kind of tries to take over. There's his political maneuverings. And he thinks another Streltsy uprising's coming. And he's not going to sit and take this one. So he's grown enough now that he calls all the people around him and the other people who are for his rule and see advantages in that. And they sort of take over, right? They're like, I'm going to be czar now. His other brother eventually dies. He then becomes just the full czar. He goes from I want to be the head czar to he's just full czar, right? The other brother really didn't want it either. Sort of sucks for that guy. But he was a nice guy. He didn't kill him or anything. But he takes over as czar. And at first, again, he's sort of just obsessed with his sort of boats. That's what he wants to do. He's just interested in learning. How does this go? There's another. We have one more Streltsy rebellion. No, that comes later. God, now I wish I'd have took notes. I don't remember every detail, people. I failed. This is what he does. He at a fairly young age, he's a grown. At a fairly young age, he goes out into the world, a great expedition. I want to hit up all the main places and learn everything that I can. And that's what he does. And I'm talking like the royal treatment and it. Well, not the royal treatment. He's silly. Here's what he does. He wants to go visit all these famous places. London, Amsterdam, these kind of things. But he wants to go incognito so that he doesn't have to do all the formal royal things that would take up his time, which he'd rather spend learning how to build boats and stuff, right? That's what. So you're like, you're gonna try and hide incognito when you're 6'7" and everyone else is way shorter than you. Yes, that's what he wants to do. Like, all right, and you're like, is it one of these things where I want to work as like just a lowly servant and should be one of the guys? Yes. He wants to hang out with servants. He likes the smaller, less ornate quarters. But he also never forgets that he's czar. And if you forget, he'll remind you. So he has this dynamic personality, right? What is it? In one instance, in like Paris, I think. They give him this big room, but he doesn't like it. So he goes to the servant's room and he's tired and he sees a guy sleeping on a bearskin rug by a fire. He kicks him. He's like, "Move, I'm sleepy." He kicks him again because the guy's like, "Who the crap is this?" Then he wakes up, realizes it's a rich guy, and he quickly leaves, lays down on that bearskin, goes to sleep. He's just like, "I'm the czar. I want to sleep here. Don't talk to me. I'm just a normal man in this group." He likes to vacillate between the two. It's very funny. He ends up learning some shipbuilding from the East India Trade Company, which blew my mind. He doesn't go to France because they're seen as Protestant, I think. Something religious. He goes to England and he sees the mint that was run by Isaac Newton. He didn't meet Isaac Newton, but he saw the mint run by it. I think he hung out with the mom of Frederick the Great. He played with a very young future King George the First, right? So I'm like, he met all these famous people. It's trippy. And he comes back to Russia after this sort of trip because of he cut it short. He was also going to go to Italy, do a bunch of Italian stuff, but he cut it short and never ended up going to the Vatican because of a Streltsy rebellion. And this time he's a grown man, and he's going to put him down for good. Yeah, that's what he does. He gets them. He has an army meet them. They get beaten badly because they're not a trained army. They're just a rabble. Some of them are executed on the spot, and like 1,000 were taken prisoner. So when he shows up, he wants to interrogate them. And by interrogate, I mean torture. And that's what he proceeds to do for the next month. Literally, in between parties, because he'd like to have big parties, he'd go and torture these men. Open flames, breaking bones. He'd beat them till they were almost dead, then heal them up, and then beat them some more, trying to get to the bottom of whatever he thought conspiracy. Then he started executing them, like 2 or 3 a day for a month, right? This bloody mess just goes on, right? One guy, he got tired of torturing him because he wouldn't crack. He'd just sit there stone-faced. And they're like, "I think he's lost the ability to speak." So they're like, "What's your name?" "Ah, my name's Ted." "You know who I am? You're the czar." "Talk." Back to silence. This guy was hard. At some point, Peter the Great, amidst this month or two of nothing but torture and murder, and death, not murder because he's in charge, of death and torture, stops and asks the guy, like, "Bro, how can you take so much pain? Just tell me an honest answer. Just tell me, and I'll reward you." The guy's like, "I had a club where we torture each other for fun." He's like, "This isn't even that bad. What gets really bad is when you put a hot coal in my ear. That gets really bad." I'm like, "What the crap is this guy?" You know what ends up breaking him? A nice comment from the czar. The czar's just like, "Look, for your love of your czar, won't you just tell me what you know?" And the guy's like, "That hurt me worse than any torture." And he talked. He gave whatever names he was going to give. He ended up letting him live, made him a colonel. Guy lived happily ever after. But he took horrible, burning torture. I don't know. These people were crazy. In any case, he spends a month killing a bunch of these Streltsy, torturing them, full on. And then the rest he dispenses across the kingdom. So there's no more Streltsy. And he starts to try and make a new modern army. And this is Peter the Great, essentially in a nutshell. From nothing, he, by sheer force of will, drags his country into a modern age. He gets back, they're Orthodox. And so they have a big pride in their beards. He's forcing people to get their beards cut, full on. In front of him, if he finds you with the beard, he's going to shave it off right then and there. And it might not be pleasant, right? Little nicks here and there. But it's the culture shift of men with no beards. He He starts having, because he went to Europe, I want women at my parties, not floozies, like ladies to talk to have them talk. And he doesn't want them dressed like Russians. He wants everyone dressed Western, French, or German. So suits and this and that. Instead of the big, like if you see Russia Santa, that's how they dress. These big, long, big sleeves, these big, thick furs. Obviously, they're in Russia. You don't want to freeze to death. That's why they wore furs. And it was an issue for some people because he was cutting sleeves off, frostbite, this kind of thing. But he didn't stop, right? And they went with him because he's the Tsar. And any sort of, like if he saw like, okay, I said it, no one's following it, I'm going to start the torture. So no one wanted that mess. He literally would post up in towns mannequins dressed Western to show those people how he wanted them to dress. It's full, you need to change the way you act now. Right? And he's doing the same with the army. He's trying to make them an actual army from the ground up. He has in his dream of a navy, a fleet that goes into the Baltic. And he wants it done quickly. On his trips, he was hiring craftsmen. He bought boats, right? They would get some boats and like break them down to see how they were made. Others, craftsmen, he brought from the Dutch to help actually make a fleet. He made like 15 boats in like 6 months before everything froze. Right? And he sailed them over to Azov, and he captured Azov, which was on the coast. He ended up losing it though. He couldn't keep that one. Because it was him in a war. He got involved in wars like Polish and then some against Sweden. Yes. The main point is he wanted to force a navy on a peoples that doesn't like the ocean. And he did with massive slave labor, making 25 ships. It's funny, he never ended up using that fleet to fight anything. Right? But the threat of the fleet kept the Ottoman Empire off of him. Because there was a time where he was at war with Sweden and they were going to, like, let's invade, and he couldn't take Sweden and the Ottoman at the same time. He'd have lost. But they saw the fleet and they're like, I don't want to risk it. So they used diplomatic means. Ended up losing it, but he wasn't worried about it. So he's in this mode, right, of forcing change on his people. And in this mode of a love of the sea. That's what's driving him. It's what made Russia a world power, by the way. You can't be a world power without a naval force. No, there's not been a history where one succeeded without it. Now, I don't think he knew this. He wasn't very educated. He was smart, but he wasn't educated. He didn't know the classics, any of this. So he's just forcing stuff in. He wants to force now, since a peace accord made it so he can't go in the Baltic, he wants to go up. I forget which that one is, but it's around Finland. Right? He has a port, but it freezes half the year. There's no fun to him, really. He wants one with more access. So he goes down the Neva River, I believe. Fights some wars there. And establishes a spot. Just like a marshy spot. And this is where his sort of vision comes in. It's very... You wouldn't pick the spot, right? Not normally. Because it's marshy. The tides hit hard. And it's cold. And there's nothing really there. Right? The Swedes only had forts there. But in his mind, I think he saw like the city that it could be. Ended up being St. Petersburg. Once he takes it, he never loses it. And it's never lost again in like the history of the book. Up until modern times. It's still Russian. No one's taking it. No one can take it. And he just forces everyone to this place. Like he forces government there. He forces all the rich nobles to build a house there, to start living there. He transplants a bunch of serfs to build up the city. Right? He's just obsessed with Petersburg. He loves it. Problem is, it's not really his. It belongs to Sweden, and that's where the second big crux of his life happens. Henry the 12th is the king of Sweden. This man's hard as all get out. You know the thing where like I'm gonna eat what my soldiers eat and sleep where they sleep and ride in the front lines. That's him to the T. He didn't ever get married. He just he's a hard-nosed kid like Peter the Great. They would have got along actually. They're related. He's a hard-nosed kid, but he loves the military, loves to fight, and he is stubborn as all get out. Meaning, if you punch me in the nose and run off, I'm beelining it this way, no ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm going to stomp you out until you're forgiven. Then I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to go back home. Now, 5 people jump me. I'm going to pick one, go after him. Once he's done, I'm going to pick the other, go after him. Once he's done, I'm going to pick the other, go after him. Right? And that's what happens. There's some wars that Peter the Great gets involved in. Russia, the Dutch, I think some Polish people, Saxons, like 50 different countries. In any case, like 5 different countries are trying to fight Sweden at once. But the man is too good at war. His strategies, his way of fighting, he beats the Dutch, and then he starts beating the Polish. I mean, he beats like 5 different people before he gets like on to Peter the Great. They call it Europe thinks he's invincible. He rides around with impunity, up in front of the lines, getting shot at, doesn't care. It's crazy. And he takes this cockiness into Russia. Right? And Russia, their army cannot win. Now, I got to explain about these armies. Back in those days, you gather up 60,000, 70,000, 100,000 dudes. And you'd march somewhere. They'd eat off the land. A professional soldier then was expected, he'd be given a gun and a uniform. But any money he makes, it's on him to make it, essentially. So, looting. You do a lot of looting if you're a soldier. Some were getting paid. Mostly the officers were getting paid. But if you wanted to make real money as a soldier, you'd have to loot something. Right? So, an army coming into a spot wasn't always pleasant. Even if they weren't raping and pillaging, right? Like, they're not going to burn the town down. They might steal some stuff, right? So, you're left without. So, it could be trouble. But it's also hard to get that many dudes together. It takes time. So if you got 100,000 and he got 100,000, a lot of times they'd show up, look at each other, and then leave. Right? One of them didn't want to engage in the fight, and so they wouldn't, because if you lose this army, it could change the course for your entire country. Right? It was that serious. And so there were a lot of skittish people. Also, they had a tendency to make nobles commanders. And so you're not really trained in war, and if you are, you're chicken, because in the back of your mind is politics. If I lose this fight, how am I going to look in court and all this and that? So in this time, very tricky to deal with these armies. So when Charles the 12th invades Russia, his army's not up to snuff. It just isn't. He tries to attack other forts on the Neva and fails in that attempt. It took him 2 attempts to get the St. Petersburg fortress at the end of the Neva River, because his army just wasn't good enough. They would run. They didn't have loyalty in that sense. They didn't have a history of fighting, so they weren't good at it. Now, if you pinned them down, Russians would fight hard. But if they got the chance, they'd try and leave. They're like, can I just lose so I can go home quick, right? They didn't have that kind of pride for these sorts of spots. So his army starts marching in, and Peter, now this is a war tactic that ends up working Much, much later on. Back in these days, they sort of, it wasn't quite dishonorable, but it was borderline. What do I mean? If William Marlborough, who was wrecking everyone, winter would come. They wouldn't fight in winter because it's too cold. They'd say, everyone go into winter quarters. That means what town I leave my soldiers in, they just pitch tents and wait till I come back in the summer. Not the commanders. The commanders talk to each other. So, William Marlborough's at war with France. We're calling for winter quarters. Fine. Now he negotiates with France to let him through France because that's the fastest way back to Britain. And they're like, that's fine. Go ahead and come. You don't capture the enemy commander. So these people were honorable. That's how they would fight. So what Peter did, which we ended up doing in the Civil War more, total warfare. That's what we called it. Means nothing is off limits. He didn't go that hard, but close. Because what he would do is he'd get close to Peter's army and then leave. And behind him, as he left, burn everything. If there's a town in the way, burn it. Every plant, all vegetation, burn everything. And he told villagers not to share any food. So he was running around decimating towns, drawing them further and further in. And the further you go, there's less for your horses to eat. There's less for your men to eat. And he just drew him into Russia, right? And what do we know what happened? Same thing happened to Napoleon. Same thing happened to Hitler. That winter hit. The thing is, they're Swedish. So the winter didn't devastate them, but it was hard on them. It was extremely hard on them. But he would never engage. He just a constant bait him, not fight. Bait him, not fight. And it seems to mess with the man's psyche. He wanted a straight up fight. He couldn't go right to Russia because the supply line was right to Moscow. The supply line was too long. But he also wasn't going to leave. He should have left. But his pride, his single-mindedness wouldn't let him leave. So he just kept getting drawn deeper and deeper into these uncharted areas. Right? And all through the winter, because they're Russians, they know how to fight in winter, they wouldn't leave. Right? In a lot of sense for them, winter was easier. They could move, they would put instead of wagon wheels, sleds. They could sled their stuff around all over the country faster than when it was summer. It's all muddy. They didn't even bother with roads because every winter you could just sled your stuff around. The trade route from Russia to China was a frozen river because the river's easy to walk on the winter. There was no roads out there though, right? So Charles is in with all this wilderness, getting harassed constantly. Just brutal fights in winter. They're both psychopaths. And I think it messed with his mind a little bit, right? He lost this clarity that he had. I think he got depressed a little. And he ends up at Poltava, I believe. It takes a fight he shouldn't take. I mean, with less men than he needs, he decides to take a fight he shouldn't take. But he ends up sick or wounded or something where he can't be in the front line just the night before. And again, instead of calling it off, he's like, we're going to go for it. I want to do it. I don't care. End up losing horribly. I mean, he lost that big army, and now he's on the run. This man ends up taking, because he's going to siege this other spot. He ends up taking a bullet to the heel that goes through his foot and out the toes. It just shatters his foot. And you're like, what the crap? And they just patch it up. And he keeps fighting. He's so hard. I mean, he's so hard. He really is. He'd go to other soldiers who had lost a heel. And he'd be like, yeah, well, I've seen this happen before. If you stuff your boot, you walk like normal. This cat was so hard. He ended up making a mega run. He went 12,000 miles in 15 days on horseback from the Ottoman Empire to Sweden. He's a wild man. He actually is. Obviously, he ends up losing the war because after Poltava, he can't recover. After after he lost the one big army, the chips are always against him. He can't ever refocus on another army. That's why I said, I mean, it that fight against the Russians essentially changes world history because Sweden stops being this empire and starts being just a country versus the Dutch Empire and the British Empire, right? But Peter the Great's fighting this man for like 20 years. Even after that loss, he still has a navy, but he could never. He loses basically half the Baltic because Peter can then take. He then starts building more navy on that not the Baltic, whatever that ocean is. I forget the name of the ocean. My apologies. He does another thing. He doesn't have the boats to take on the Swedish navy, even with the ones he's making, even as big as they are. Their navy's too strong. So what he does is he makes little, essentially like rafts, small like oars, galleys they call them. You just row them out. It's what you use more on a river. And they're not good out in the open sea unless the waters are calm, right? So he makes like 90 of these. And he skirts along the coast where they can't get. And that's how he takes the rest of this. Oh, it's bugging me. What ocean is this? It is the Baltic. I was thinking Baltic Black Sea. He ends up taking a lot of the rest of the Baltic Sea with these because the Swedish fleet can't get in. And if they get close, he swarms them. With 90 of these little boats, the cannons can't shoot straight down. Now you got 800 guys attacking your boat. And they keep taking boats this way. So that's a little interesting naval bit. But what he establishes there, he by force of will, makes Russia a navy. Makes them an army. Modernizes their government. By sheer force of will and edict. You will do what I say in the way I say it. Constantly traveling around making sure it's done. I say force of will and slave labor. Let's not kid ourselves. But this rarely happens in human history. There's not been a spot, I don't think, that, well, no, Korea kind of come up fairly quickly from backwater to modern, if we're thinking of it. But there's not many spots that can change this dynamically. And it was his vision. They even through communist Russia, they didn't lose their respect for this one individual, right? His boots, they kept his boots. They kept his house, a cabin he made, all this kind of thing. Because he forced this change onto Russia. With some resistance, mind you. How long has this been? You know what? I think that's pretty good. I'm not going to cover every detail. What I will say again about the end is he kind of ruins the end, right? Like if I read a book about Napoleon, and he established this until he died. You could do that a lot. But if you don't and you stay in the moment, I feel like I'm with the character longer, right? The Napoleon book is like that. I feel like I'm with the character longer. And then he ends up at the island and dies. And now I know he dies because Napoleon doesn't live forever. Right? So I know Peter the Great dies. But it's like I see it coming because he mentions it too much. Right? And the tail end, like I said, instead of the detail of the first half, loses some of that detail. And he gets schizophrenic, right? Right. Instead of telling me all about this trip, he's like, he went there and kind of did these things, kind of did that, kind of did this. Whereas if he'd have taken me there, the book might have been twice as long, but I'd have been with Peter the Great in all these moments. It'd have felt more cohesive, right? So it's a little bit of a downer on that end, but on the whole, great book. I didn't cover every little bit. Just some of the stuff I remember. Obviously, no notes. How does he die? He drinks too much. He drinks too much, and he got continually sick, but didn't listen to the doctor, so he's like still running around in frozen water. This kind of thing. He went down pretty hard. Like you imagine if he'd have followed a doctor or they had any decent medicine, he easily lived into 80, 90 years old. He had a good constitution, as they say. Okay, we're in our ad portion now. So if you could, put this in a side browser, open your internet, and go buy my book from Amazon, that would be highly appreciated. I would use all of your money to buy hamburgers, probably, or more books, or various things. I'm not going to lie. It is going to be fun rebinding this one, though. It's not, like normally if you look at the bindings on books, some of them are stitched up a little bit. This one ain't stitched at all. There's like 10,000 free pages here that I'm going to have to needlework through. I'm going to needlework through them. Yeah, I'm going to needlework through them. Then I'm going to bind all those together. Then I'm going to glue them all together and hopefully try and stick them back in this book. They're great maps on either side. I think I'm able to. I think I can salvage the maps. I'll scrape all that dirty glue off. You know what? I should take this whole cover off and then try and like glue it to some leather or something. Nah, that may be too much. Maybe too much. It's just cheap glue. There's no way around it. Oh, it all comes apart anytime I want. That's going to be a pain, though. It'll be fun. I'll try it. But, what is it? Should I talk about my books? Go buy them. They're good. Not going to give too much away. Now, you can read the little blurb I gave my books. See if you like them. Yeah, I'm not forcing you. The content's still free. I don't know if this was better without notes. I'm not sure. Well, I guess when I re-listen to it, I'll make a decision. But I think this one will go live. I think it went well enough. Obviously, I'm not going to cover every detail, but I think it went well enough. Biographies are fun, people. Give them a chance. I'm also reading. I'm gonna be spoiler alert. I'm reading Game of Thrones right now. It's not as good as some of these biographies. Not gonna lie. All right, this one's long enough. Oh man. Oh, it's so long. It's gonna take forever to edit. No, it's gonna take forever to upload. All right. Talk to you later.